What effect does phosphorus have on the Chesapeake Bay?
Okay, if you're asking what are the biggest threats to the Chesapeake Bay in terms of maintaining fisheries and the entire economy involved in recreation, probably the biggest issues are excessive nitrogen and phosphorus and excessive amounts of suspended sediment are really the top things. There are other issues, but for the whole bay as a whole, those are really big ones. The problem with excessive phosphorus, it is a limiting nutrient in the bay, particularly at certain times of year. I think earlier in the season, the amount of phosphorus is what's limiting the growth of floating phytoplankton algae in general. And so the more phosphorus gets in the water, the more these floating algae can grow and proliferate. They're taking up the phosphorus. And from a food web perspective, you'd think, oh, this is good because there's more food for plankton that would feed fish, but it gets to the point where there's way too much. The major problems then are that the density of these floating plankton is so great, the water's just murky. And then actually anything that's not in the top, couple of inches or meters of the water, any other kinds of plants, particularly in the Chesapeake Bay, the submerged aquatic vegetation, the rooted plants, have historically been really, really crucial to providing oxygen at depth because they're rooted on the bottom, and as long as they get enough light, they're doing photosynthesis, releasing oxygen, and that's crucial to keeping all the animals alive at depth. And if you have very cloudy surface water, you totally cut off a lot of these rooted plants at depth, and then there's not as much oxygen production, and given the salt layering in the bay, the oxygen that is produced isn't getting down to depth very well. Meanwhile, all those algae growing up at the surface, they get old, they die, they rain down to the bottom and decompose, and you're actually losing oxygen at the bottom and not replenishing it, and so that is fatal to any like crabs or particularly oysters, anything living at depth. Once you kill the oysters off, you've gotten rid of the agent that would most effectively remove the algae, and effectively the oysters could help to sediment the phosphorus to the bottom of the bay, and if it would just stay there and get covered up by mud, it would be great, but we've lost a lot of the parts that would help remove that. So probably one of the biggest things is just the role it plays in lack of oxygen through excess growth. Then there's also more localized issues about when you have really high nutrient concentrations like phosphorus, nitrogen, and particularly in some of the tributaries on the eastern shore elsewhere. Sometimes in the summer, maybe it's a drought, you get a low flow, it gets really warm, and that's where particular kinds of harmful algal blooms may develop locally that can lead to fish kills. And people maybe remember some years ago there was a particular strain of dinoflagellate, Pfiesteria, that was producing tumors in fish, but it had such a neurotoxin, such a strong neurotoxin that it was actually causing memory loss in watermen. And in fact, scientist that was studying, Dr. Joanne Burkholder, was the one that figured out what was going on with Pfiesteria. And so that's just an example of one kind of harmful algal species. Hopefully they're not all that toxic, but in certain localized cases, it seems like it's a team effect of excessive phosphorus and other nutrients and warm waters and low flow that can make these spot problems in addition to the kind of the bay as a whole.